Glad you're back this week when our topic is IFSPs and IEPs, writing high quality ones. And I actually am going to start by talking a little bit about functional assessment. So, why are we talking about assessment when we're supposed to be talking about writing IFSPs and IEPs? Well, many of you already know the answer to that question. Assessment informs what goes into the IEP or IFSP, and it helps us to target specific outcomes or goals. And and when we were talking earlier in the semester about the philosophy and the culture of early childhood education, EI and ECSE, one of the things that we didn't talk about was the culture around assessment. It's a little different for early childhood education than what you may see in many schools today, the more traditional assessment model for K 12 students. And so I really wanted us to take a few minutes and get our perspectives right, get the philosophy behind us, and then we'll apply that in another presentation as we talk about writing IFSP and IEP goals. Okay, so this is actually a wonderful presentation that was designed by ECTA and RRCP, the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center and the Regional Resource Center program. And these programs are terrific ones that really create some fabulous resources for teachers of young children. And so they have also been absolutely wonderful in sharing these presentations and allowing localities, allowing teacher prep programs to use them in educating their future early childhood educators. Okay, so you can see here all about the development of the program. And our goal in this presentation is to talk about functional assessment and how it is that we gather information about a child's functioning. We also want to be able to differentiate conventional versus functional assessments. And we, of course, always want to talk about how we partner with families. So let's get into it. So, the research indicates that to be effective in supporting families to understand and influence their children's development, we have to begin the planning process for services with the assessment process itself. Through the information that we gather during functional assessment, we have the foundation necessary to develop functional outcomes and goals for young children with identified needs. And so, a couple of the things we're going to talk about: what is functional assessment? Why is it foundational? Who does it? Where's it done? And how is it done? So, those are your objectives. Functional or authentic assessment of a young child's skills happens in real life contexts, family, of culture, and community, rather than in isolation. Functional assessment results in reflecting the whole child. So, Yuri Bronfenbrenner, you all may remember him from child development classes. He was an ecological systems theorist, and he made this very interesting quote. He says, assessment is the science of the strange behavior of children with strange adults in strange settings for the briefest possible period of time. And that is really how we have approached assessment of children since assessment of children became a thing. It's really not the best way to assess children of any age, and certainly not children in the early childhood age range. There are many right ways to provide functional assessment, including Play-based models or intentionally designed ongoing functional assessment, um, assessing the environment, all kinds of ways to do this. When we truly value authentic information gathered from a functional assessment, we can approach more traditional evaluation in ways that are much more child and family friendly. So, even if you're in a system that still values traditional assessment, there's a huge difference that can be made by changing your perspective on trying to use the assessment process to describe the whole child. Functional assessment takes place in the context of everyday behaviors with familiar adults in comfortable, known settings and over time. So you don't just go in and spend 2 hours with a child you've never met before, write that up and call it an assessment. Functional assessment is looking at assessment over a period of time. It's looking at how students do in their normal environments and typically with people that they already know. So, functional assessment relies on information reported by those who know the child well and have observed them in ongoing development and learning. Assessment is conducted and interpreted within the framework of how the child functions within a number of social and cultural systems. Ecological is considering the social context of the child in the family, neighborhood, and community. And ethnographic considers the cultural context. So we want to look at all of these things. Research shows that functional assessment yields more valid and usable assessment results. So let's look at how this changes our perspective. Take a look at this. We're shifting from the student knows how to make eye contact, smile, and give a hug to the student initiates affection toward caregivers and responds to others' affection. So our shift focused from specific skills in specific situations to a more functional picture of the child. For example, our focus shifts from noticing that the child makes eye contact to what does that actually lead to? What does that mean? And so, as we're writing functional assessment goals, we do need to be specific. They need to be measurable. They need to be action oriented. They need to be relevant. They need to be attainable. And they need to be time limited. But we can also shift our perspective a bit when we're writing functional assessment outcomes and goals to talk about meaningful change and meaningful information about the impact of our goals on this child in a larger term. This also helps us with one of our problems in special education, the problem of generalization. So when we focus on goals in closed settings that are unusual settings with people the child doesn't necessarily know that well, and we don't incorporate the family. And when we focus on those very specific school centered behaviors, it's very hard to generalize those to real life. And that's been a problem for us in special education for decades. And so, a focus on functional assessment and the function of this particular goal in a child's larger picture, the whole child, helps us to do a much better job about generalizing. Authenticity is important because the more realistic the task, the more motivated the child will be, and the more applicable it is to everyday events and situations. So, authentic means generalizable. Authentic tasks reinforce competency based approach used in educating young children, assessment across disciplines of complex skills and processes, and generalization across learning settings. So, authentic tasks require that the assessor make no inferences about the child's capabilities because the behaviors sampled are directly observable. We often hear in education we need to focus on data, data, data. What is directly observable, what we see, what we describe that we see in a way that everybody else would see the same thing, that is actual data. That is meaningful data. It's much more meaningful than test scores. So, how does this differ from conventional assessment? Well, conventional assessment has its place in early intervention and early childhood special education. Standardized testing helps us distinguish typical from atypical performance. Often the scores are reported in a percent delay or standard deviations that many states require for determining a child's eligibility. That's very important. However, this kind of data isn't all that useful in writing useful, high quality, measurable, reasonable IFSP and IEP goals. Traditional standardized evaluations alone do not provide the information needed to develop functional IFSPs or IEPs that can be implemented within the day to day routines of the family, the school, the community, or childcare. They do not determine what the child is able to do, likes to do, or needs to do in regard to the family or caregiver's priorities. They do not provide a clear understanding of the child's abilities across environments and care providers. That's only accomplished through observation and information sharing. While standardized testing is sometimes required in states for determining a child's eligibility for services, it should never be the only source of information about the child. Why is functional fundamental? Why do we really need to make sure we are using functional assessment in early childhood education? Well, functional assessment practices translate family concerns such as she can't let others know what she wants, or he doesn't sit at the table with us during meals, into positive statements such as I want her to be able to let others know what she wants, and I want him to be able to sit with us during meals. Ultimately, this guides the identification of functional, individualized outcomes and goals. The assessment team gains valuable information when they inquire about the child's preferences for activities, materials, play partners, schedules, and detailed health and developmental information. The authentic assessment of infants and toddlers and preschoolers requires specialized training and skills beyond the training and skills needed for older children. Team members should include individuals who have the expertise necessary to assess the unique needs of young children suspected of having a disability. Functional assessment is conducted by a team of families and professionals from various disciplines. The team can observe and analyze a wide range of tasks and skills, provide a greater sampling of behaviors in real and natural contexts. Functional information enhances team observations and validates team findings. And of course, when we work in teams, communication between and among team members is needed to provide a coordinated process, minimize the intrusiveness of the process for the child, family, and others, and to ensure that a comprehensive process is completed. You've probably already noticed that observation is a theme throughout this section. Functional assessment involves observation of the child in natural circumstances and information shared about the observations of people familiar with the child. When families share their observations, we develop a more complete and accurate picture of the child. It's important to let families know that you value their observations and participation in ongoing, authentic assessment. Giving families concrete examples of the kinds of information you would like them to share is very helpful. Remember, functional assessment is conducted over time and across settings. Functional assessment is done through gathering and compiling information about the child's functioning from multiple sources, including multiple approaches to assessment and observing across multiple settings, in order to yield information that links assessment to services, programs, and outcomes. Selecting appropriate assessment tools is an important part of the functional assessment process. So, being clear about the purpose of the assessment is critical. Tests may be norm referenced, criterion referenced, or curriculum based. However, the most reliable information about young children is generated when these tools are used within an authentic functional assessment model, which includes record review, developmental history, interviews, checklists, rating scales, anecdotal recordings, portfolios, technology, and observation. It's important to note that data gathered from more traditional methods are not as effective in providing functional information for developing IFSPs and IEPs, developing outcomes or goals, planning services, or in measuring global outcomes, hence the need for using multiple source information. Involving families is key in conducting functional assessment, developing functional IFSP outcomes and IEP goal statements, and measuring the global outcomes required by the programs. Involving families in functional assessment is more than asking questions, going over questionnaires, or developmental profiles. To truly involve families, providers must listen to the family story, observe and ask about the child's everyday routines and activities related to engagement, independence, and social relationships. Ask parents to show or describe what happens in everyday routines or activities. Observe the parent caregiver child interactions and observe the child playing. Data gathered from more traditional methods are not as effective in providing functional information for developing IFSPs and IEPs, developing outcomes or goals in planning services, or in meeting global outcomes. I think you've heard that a few times now. That's probably pretty important. So, here are a few questions that you might ask parents that help to relate everyday activities and routines. It's important to guide the conversation to what is relevant to both the child and the family, modifying the words you use to match their situation and probe for further information. Involving families through the questions we ask about everyday activities and routines is how we focus on what is functional for that particular family. This is also a great way to build a bond with families. Instead of just pulling out a pre-printed questionnaire and checking off boxes, you're having a conversation, and it's a conversation about that family and how that family interacts with their child. Most families are absolutely thrilled to give you this information. Some other families may be a little reluctant. That's okay. Just take your time, keep asking questions, and eventually you'll get the information that you need. Here's some more questions for you. Take a minute and read through these. You'll notice there's a question here. Are there activities that you used to do before your child was born that you would like to do again? One of the things we know is that parents of young children, and particularly young children with disabilities, have very little time to themselves. Asking this question establishes that it's okay to have those wishes. And it also opens the way for you to offer supports later on that can help those parents get time that they need to decompress, de-stress, and in doing that, become better parents to their children. So here's the how: gathering relevant information. This chart illustrates how this information can be helpful. So let's start on the left-hand side of the chart. If through conversation with the family shares that bath time is a great time of day for the child and family, the assessment team may think about identifying and enhancing learning opportunities during that time of day. Let's say that having the child use words to express wants and needs is a priority for the family. The team may be able to employ some intervention strategies during bath time that will ultimately increase the child's functional abilities to use words throughout the day. Routines and activities that are going well provide a great opportunity to identify and enhance learning opportunities to address family priorities. On the flip side, if the family shares information about routines and activities that are not going well, these may become priorities that families want to work on with early intervention. For example, if bath time was very difficult because the child fusses and has difficulty sitting in the tub, the team may identify the hindering and helping factors and employ intervention strategies to ultimately improve bath time. This in turn promotes the child's functional abilities in the areas of social relationships, engagement, and independence. So, by understanding what's going well and what's challenging, the team can work within those natural routines to increase the child's functional abilities. And where is functional assessment conducted? It's conducted in the child's natural everyday settings, activities, and routines. How do you know where that is? Ask the family. Okay, friends, that's it for the presentation on functional assessment. Stay tuned for another presentation coming up soon, and thanks for listening.